Hi there. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today I am talking to Calgary singer-songwriter Justine Giles. You know, unlike a lot of artists, she does not want to overdo it. Quite the opposite, in fact. In an era and a business where quality often takes a backseat to quantity and artists are expected to constantly pump out new music, this Alberta singer-songwriter prefers to take a slow, steady, and methodical approach to her craft. Case in point, her latest EP, Another Chance. True to its title, this five-song release resurrects the count them, three singles she's released since 2022, along with one new song and an acoustic version of another number. Shortly after the EP arrived, Giles zoomed in from home to talk about her less is more approach, her musical upbringing, writing songs about chicken nuggets, and more. Enjoy. I was surprised to see that you are not originally from Calgary.
Yeah,
That seems to be you moved from Toronto out there, which seems to be kind of the opposite direction to how this usually works.
totally.
What's the
Yeah.
story behind that?
Yeah, it's well, it is a story, that's for sure. I was born and raised in Sudbury, so Northern
Oh,
Ontario, and then I kind of just felt like I was outgrowing that scene a little bit. I mean, being born and raised there, I stayed there for school, and it's a very small community, so after I released my first record about 10 years ago, I went to Montreal for a little bit just to kind of explore the world, and then I eventually moved to Toronto, where I took this thing called CMI, Canada's Music Incubator, which is a program for artists. So I met artists in that program from across Canada, which was really cool. And I was working with a producer there, and things didn't work out the best. And, you learn some hard lessons along the way about the industry and that kind of thing. And so I just got to a point where I kind of needed a fresh start. And I've always been really attracted to the West Coast for some reason. I don't know if it's the mountains or just like a different vibe. And luckily, I had some artist friends out here. So basically, I just packed up everything and moved to Calgary in late 2019 with a lot of hopes and ambitions and a lot of work to do to kind of start over.
wow.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big move, and especially, I mean, a lot of people will move for a job or for love or money are generally the two
totally.
reasons why people move, right? So to sort of just pack up and go, well, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm going to Calgary for my art is kind of wild. And how was it, what kind of welcome did you get? How has it been going out there?
Yeah. And you're right. It is like a huge risk, and there's no guarantees, right, that anything's going to work out no matter what. Like whether it is for love or money or just for yourself, like it was in my case. Um, Honestly, I was so surprised at how Calgary was so warm and welcoming to me. They have a really amazing arts scene here. And about 3 months after I moved here, I went to a showcase. So they started running Canada's Music Incubator out here as well around the same time, but calling it AE West. So then they have a like a Western Canada version. So I went to a showcase 3 months after getting here, and this is at a venue called the King Eddie, and the whole room was full of people that I knew. And I was like, this is wild. Like, I just moved across the country basically with nothing. And here I am in this venue where I know friends, artists, mentors, managers, producers. Like, it was so wild to me that something like that could happen. But it just goes to show how like close knit the community is here. So quickly after that, I was able to really network, and then, well, the pandemic happened. So, um,
Oops.
yeah, I mean, it was a tough time for everybody, but at the same time, I was so primed to like start over and start rebuilding, and so it really gave me a time to like focus on songwriting and connect with the new people that I had just met over the past like couple months of being here, right? And so yeah, it worked out somehow.
And do the scenes kind of feel, I mean, is one scene sort of same as the other, or same as all of them, or is there something very distinctly different about this community in Calgary, aside from obviously the size, I'm sure it's a little smaller than the one you were maybe part of in Toronto.
Yeah, I think Calgary does have something really distinctly different. It does kind of remind me a little bit of Sudbury in the sense that it feels like a small town sometimes, for better or for
Mm,
worse. Like
sure.
there's a comfort level there, but also everybody knows everybody, and again, like that's a positive and a negative depending on what the situation is.
Right.
But I will say the amount of opportunities that I've had here have been like astronomical in comparison, even during things like the pandemic. There were a lot
Right.
of like songwriting contests locally or province-wide, like either competitions or contests for artists to apply to get funding to help you through that time and apply that to things like recording. So that was really surprising to me as well. And I think there's something really special about even like small town Alberta, which is kind of shocking, but anytime I go to like a small town that I've never played before,
Mhm.
it seems to be really like well received, and people really seem to care about the artistry, and they will talk to you after the show and get really invested. I had a hard time in the Toronto scene finding those types of shows. And I think maybe just because of the population, like there's so many artists that go to Toronto, and it's been like
Right.
that for so many years, right? The idea was always like you got to move to Toronto and get a record
Right.
deal and make it big there because it's almost like our Hollywood, if you will. And I just found it was so oversaturated that I couldn't even find my place. And so
Right.
I found that in Calgary, I could kind of just like naturally find my place, if that makes sense.
Right. And
And
it reminds me a bit of Winnipeg in that you've got a community that of mostly people who grew up here, they're based here, they're proud of being here, they're happy to be here. Not all of them are necessarily it's not a step up the ladder to Toronto, which I think when you're in Toronto, especially, there's a whole lot of people, as you said, who have moved there from everywhere else. So you don't have that same sort of, you can't make old friends, right?
yeah,
It's that same sort of thing where you're coming into this community of a lot of people who have known each other probably for years and years and years. I think it's nice that, nobody gave you the stink eye or kind of went, "Oh, Toronto? Yeah. Oh,
totally. It's funny because a lot of people moved out here for work within the last 20 years, and
Sure.
so there are tons of people here like from Ontario, and it's not necessarily like a foreign story to people. Like a lot of people have moved to Calgary to kind of start over and start a new life, which is kind of a cool way to connect with people too. But I will say as well, like I think everyone has this idea that Calgary is just full of country music, and it
No,
very much is, but at the same time it's amazing to me that I see artists in jazz, in folk, in rock, anything, every single
sure.
genre, and everyone here has an opportunity to play live and basically make a living doing it. And I don't see that in every city.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, anybody who thinks Calgary's all country just has to, I mean, Sled Island.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
yeah, boom. So, I saw that you've talked about in your press release that for the new EP, Another Chance. There's a quote where you talk about the past. Your quote is the past several years have been about you getting out of your own way and learning how to let your guard down on stage and in the studio. Is what we've been talking about, has that helped in that regard?
For sure. I think it's based so much on the people. Like the people can really make the place, in my opinion. Like it's not to say I didn't meet impactful people in Toronto, because I did. Like, but I
Sure.
think you really can meet people along the way that shape who you are and how you think about life. And it's something that you can't necessarily control, right? Like we all go through life trying to navigate everything, and the world can be a really crazy place. But for some reason, I think I met a lot of people when I moved to Calgary that really changed how I saw things.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think it's just one of those things that evolves over time naturally too. I think sometimes you can kind of surprise yourself. Like I've always written really personal songs, and I've been doing that since I was like a teenager, like that's not new to me, but I think when you're met with more and more support and you keep showing up and you
Right.
keep showing more of yourself, and it seems like it's a safe thing to do, or at least it's received well, or people are impacted by that, or they feel the need to share with you something that they went through, like it builds on that energy, I think, and then that shows up in every new work that I create. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I can push this even further. for myself and just
Right.
for others, right?
And not just in terms of, like you say, being on stage or being in the studio and being more of a quote unquote performer, but I'm guessing it impacts your actual writing in terms of what you're putting down on the page, right?
Totally. And I think
Yeah.
as a songwriter, like I really enjoy telling stories. Like I really love nothing more than more of a listening audience where like even if it's somewhat passive, um you could say something that sparks someone's attention. Like the stories in between the songs are just as vital in my case, I think.
Okay. Do you tell a lot of stories between the songs? Is that
Yeah, I do.
you're
And
a
I think
chatty performer?
I can be. I think it depends on what the show is though, right? I mean,
Of
every
course.
every every
Yeah.
venue is different. It's not always like a welcomed thing to do that. It depends on what the case is. I mean, at like the EP release party, then of course you're going to tell the stories of like,
Yeah.
reflecting on the last 5, the last 10 years, all that kind of stuff. In a festival setting, you probably have less time to chat
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
right, in depth. But yeah, I've found that that's something that connects me to like so many different walks of life. Like so many different people can connect just from telling like a silly little story. And I try not to be scripted about it either. Like
Hmm.
sometimes I
Well, that's
don't,
good because yeah,
yeah.
that gets that, people see through that so fast, I think. I mean, I don't know if you went to see Bruce Springsteen just the other day in Calgary.
No, I'm probably one of the only people that didn't go.
Okay. I went to the Winnipeg show and I've seen him before and I'm a fan who isn't. But one of the things that I was kind of a little disappointed about is maybe I was too prepped in the sense of, oh, here comes this story, here comes that story, and I mean, I know not everybody is on the same page that way, but for me, it was kind of like, you're just reading from a script.
Yeah, it's a little predictable, right?
Right. Everybody wants that special moment, which I think is part of what we're talking about here in terms of you coming out and finding the confidence to be more yourself on stage and tell stories that maybe you wouldn't have 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that story about Bruce because like yeah, it's a fine line to walk. There are certain stories that you will always have associated with a particular song, right? Like it'll
Sure.
bring back memories or how you recorded it has a cool story or whatever. But yeah, there's something that's really special, and that's one of the things I love about performing the most is trying to just be present and whatever comes out of my mouth, like you know, sometimes I trust. You just got to trust it and trust yourself in the moment, or
You
you
ever get in
play.
trouble?
No, surprisingly not, knock on
Okay.
wood, but
Yeah.
no, I think like it's because it's an interaction and it's an energy between the audience that's different at every show. And so sometimes
Right.
someone will shout something out and you can kind of play on that or something just sparks in that moment that you could have never planned for. And I think there's like a magic in a sense to those moments.
So what performers kind of do that for you in terms of watching them on stage?
Yeah, I grew up with a lot of like 90s influences because I'm a early 90s baby. So
Hmm.
I grew up watching like Sarah McLachlan and Sheryl Crow and all the Lilith Fair girls, Alanis Morissette. Like I was
Right.
so young when Jagged Little Pill came out, but I think that record was so ahead of its time. Uh, and still like stands through the test of time till today. Like I still love that record so much. And these days I'm listening to a lot of like Tennille Townes, who's from Alberta. I just got to see her last week, and she's
Right.
fantastic. I really, really resonated with her performance and seeing how she interacts with her crowd because it was kind of unlike anything I've ever seen, to be honest with you, because it was so much about her audience and not about her. And she had like such a young following of like young girls, which I'm seeing an increase of at my shows. And I feel like it's so important to like acknowledge them in the way that Tennille did.
Right.
I've never really seen it done that way. And I was like, wow, she's really onto something special with that. And having the girls come up and signing the posters on stage or inviting them on stage to sing a song with her, it was like, this is so awesome. Um, just creating those moments that people will remember forever, right?
Yeah, definitely. So how did you make the jump from, being an early 90s kid and listening to all these artists to going, oh, you know what? I want to do this. I want to try this. I think I can do this.
Yeah, it's something I always did as a kid. My dad's a musician, so I grew up
Oh,
like in a pretty musical
mhm.
household and
Like
my
professional musician or just
yeah.
hobby? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of got to a point where I think he let the dream go kind of thing, but still was
Mm,
like an active musician in Sudbury.
mhm.
But when I was really young, I mean, he was on tours all the time between
Would we
Ontario.
would we know who he is? Is he
No, I don't
okay?
I don't think so, but this was around the time where country was like massive all over the
Mhm,
place. And so yeah, he played in a lot of bands and would tour Ontario, Quebec, come back, and then go to a day job at 6 a.m., like
mhm. Oh,
just
so a
the
real working musician, like
yeah,
down in the trenches. Yeah.
totally. So he was like a writer, a bass player. He's a great singer to this day. I actually had him come out for my EP release party, which was really special because we used to gig
Okay.
together back in the day. And I thought this is kind of like the 10-year anniversary from our first record that he helped me kind of produce in
Right.
Sudbury. So yeah, it was special to have him fly out to Calgary for this show like a few weeks ago.
So that I mean that can be an example that is I mean first of all it's a great example because it gives you a real understanding of what the job and that life is actually like. But I would also think maybe I mean was he encouraging or did he kind of go, this is maybe you maybe you want to do something else with your life, you know?
Luckily, my dad was always like super supportive about it. And I kind of wanted to go my own way with it, if that makes sense. Like I also went to schools that really cherished the arts and had a
Hmm.
lot of theater productions. So like my grade schools were really good for that, but also I went to an arts high school.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of chances to kind of foster my own craft. Like at one point, I think my dad wanted to teach me guitar chords, and I was kind of like, "Hey, Dad, I got to do this on my own." Like I wanted it to be my own thing, and it was one of those weird lines to walk as well because I wanted to invite him in, but it's such a personal thing at the same time that I was like, how much am I letting my dad into my art, right?
I was going to say, way to shoot down your dad.
You know what's funny is I stole his guitar, so he had an acoustic guitar at home being primarily a bass player, though. And so one day, I guess I just decided to take this guitar and I literally never gave it back. So this is my primary guitar that I've toured with
Oh,
over
nice.
like the course of the 10 years across Canada. It's got some, some little dings in it from flying and whatever. But I've written most of my songs on this guitar. And when I was a teenager, he bought me my own guitar. And I never played it, and we ended up selling it because there's just something about this guitar that he had.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
so
sure.
I play it to this day.
Ah, well, I bet. Yeah, that's a treasure.
Yeah,
So, for somebody who's been at this as long as you've been at it, I find it interesting because you seem to be taking a very sort of measured and deliberate approach to this. Particularly these days, we live in a world where artists are kind of expected to be constantly in the public eye and constantly in your face and constantly putting out new material. But I mean, you've been putting out kind of a song a year for the past few years. What is it about that approach? How come you're kind of taking that route?
I think there's pros and cons, right? The industry is constantly changing. It's changed so much from the time I put out my first single in 2014. Like at that point, people were still paying 99 cents a song, and you
Right.
would get a cut from it, right? And so
Hmm.
I think over the years, this whole streaming model changed the game on a lot of levels because unfortunately, like the reality is just that artists are not going to see a return on investment from that recording via
No.
Spotify. It's just not going to happen. And so
Right.
um it's just one of those things like it's a quantity versus quality thing for me.
Right.
It would be easy enough. I think anyone can make a recording in their bedroom or in their basement and put it out on Spotify these days, and people do, and then they do the whole like release something every 6 weeks thing.
Hmm.
I really value the whole process of working on a recording for anywhere from like 4 to 6 months for one song in the studio and having it kind of like marinate and develop into something which completely is like an evolution from the demo. So that's kind of how my producer works. And I think that there's pros and cons to that too. But I think there's something to be said about like the quality of your work and really like marinating on a song, vocally becoming more comfortable with it too. Like when
Hmm,
I write a demo, it's probably nowhere near where it's going to be 6 months down the line when I really get comfortable with singing the song live and in the studio. Like to witness and to hear back that growth is pretty amazing. And yeah, I think it's like also a financial decision, to be quite honest. Like investing that amount of money, like there's so many. I don't think people realize sometimes, like if people are doing a full band production, how much money is going into that, like paying the producer and paying the session
sure.
players and all these types of things. Like you're paying these people to do a job, and these are like radio ready recordings, right? That
Right.
you'll have forever, and that's something that I really value investing in. And yeah, so I think it just kind of organically happened that way. Like
Hmm.
things, I think good things take time, and also by the time I release a new song, if it's like once or twice a year, I go hard on those releases, and have been trying to build like those connections with media, which is also a whole other story because the media scene is really changing right now too.
Sure. Yeah.
Because even a year ago, it's like cool, you can like go on, or a couple years ago, go on global news, and people were still really watching the morning shows, and that's like
Right.
dwindling by the year. Um, so yeah, I still try really hard with every release, like to go really hard on the press interviews and just sharing about the process and yeah, there's just like a lot of growth that happens. I don't really want to ever do things like willy-nilly. I want to kind of go all in with
Yeah, well, I mean,
recordings.
that's you really get that sense. I mean, is this something that's evolved over the years? I mean, this approach, or did you
Yeah,
have you always been that way? No? Okay.
I think at the beginning I was self-produced when I put out my first record, and
Hmm.
looking back and listening back, it kind of sounds like a demo, right? And so
Sure.
like I've pulled a lot of that stuff off of streaming because it's just like not where I want it to be. And and it's not that I'm ashamed of that work. It's just
No,
like,
no, of
but the
course, yeah.
growth is insane. Like that that music would never end up on a radio playlist ever
Right.
because the quality is not there, right? And yeah, there's something that's just really special about music living on forever. Like even if you're not recording for the intention of just streaming and radio, like these are pieces of art. Like these are things that were created within a period of time in collaboration with other people, and that will like live on forever, and I think there's really something like special about that.
Well, that's an interesting approach. And again, I think kind of at odds with where a lot of people are today.
Yeah,
That having that sort of longer, bigger view of it is fascinating. When you're working on, I mean, do you tend to work on one song from start to finish, or do you have, a whole bunch of stuff that's in various stages of completion at any point in time?
it kind of varies. Like sometimes
Hmm.
I'll sit down, and some of these songs on this EP, I kind of literally like I don't know where it comes from half the time, but I'll kind of just like hear a vocal melody in my mind coupled with lyrics. I've always been a very like lyric based person and wrote a ton of poetry when I was a kid, and I love wordplay. Like that kind of thing is really satisfying for my brain. Like my brain just works in rhymes and likes to piece things together with words.
Right.
And sometimes I'll just kind of have a random melody idea, and I'll sit down with my guitar and flush it out, and there's your demo, like full song front to back. It's amazing when that happens, but it doesn't always happen that way. And sometimes I'll just get a really strong chorus, or what I think will be the chorus, but I'll really struggle with verse two. And sometimes I'll have to, for some reason, it's verse two always. That's like the hardest part. I could write
Uh-huh.
like solid, or what I feel is a solid first verse, chorus, awesome. And then it's like, how do you follow it up with a really strong second verse that follows the same kind of pattern as the first.
Right.
Anyway, so sometimes I'll end up like putting something on the shelf for a few months, and it can't always be a forced thing. And I've tried sometimes to be really analytical about it, and sometimes when you're in that editing brain, it's not the same state of mind as when you just need to let ideas
Right.
flow.
Right.
So, but that's happened as well, where something can be put on the shelf for a few months or even for a couple years before I'm ready to like really return to it and finish it.
Do you need inspiration? Is that kind of the key for you? Because there are some songwriters I talk to, especially ones who have been at it as long as you have, who say, it's kind of a spigot. If I need to write songs, I can turn this on and I can sit down and I can write an album in a few days. And I don't really get the sense that that's your process.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I definitely try to go on the inspiration route of it all.
Hmm.
There's pros and cons to that. I feel like
Sure.
when you ride that wave, actually, I heard someone talking about this the other day. Like, I think it was Bob Dylan that was very similar. Like, you just kind of catch that wave. Here's the song, and it's like one of the best songs you've ever written. And you can't always replicate that. But that's
Hmm.
kind of how that style of songwriting happens. Like, the inspiration just kind of strikes, or you overhear a conversation, or you have a conversation with somebody that just like sparks something, and you got to go home and write that song. I think I've always really written that way, but to your point, like there is the other style of songwriting. So, um, if I need to songwrite on demand, like with students, I do. Like I work part-time at the National Music Center and
Hmm.
we have some like songwriting workshops with kids. And so they can throw out random ideas to me and I'll be able to couple it together in a few minutes and we'll just like compose a song together. So I can do it, but I don't think I would ever end up doing that for one of my own singles
Sure.
or records. Like it, because I think it really comes down to the context, right? And what the song is about. Inspiration for me, like strikes a really deep chord, and it's usually about something really profound or really deep. But the songs that I can write on demand with kids are usually about something like really like lighthearted or silly, or anything from outer space, or they love chicken nuggets, or things that are not really things that I need to like
Come
contemplate.
on. The chicken nugget song seems like a winner.
You'd be surprised. Like every
Uh-huh.
single group of kids that comes in wants to write about chicken nuggets and their love for chicken. So, um,
Wow, it seems to me that
yeah,
this is a market you should be tapping here. But even so, doing that job, that work, just the mechanics of it, right, is good for an artist. Just to have the guitar in your hands and to be taking those things and just doing even if it's the sort of I can never remember the left brain, mechanical work of just putting it
yeah,
together like that. It's great practice. It's part of that 10,000 hours thing, right?
100%. And it's one of
Mm.
those things that I never really think twice about because that's just how my brain has always operated. And I was always
Mhm.
like encouraged to use that skill set from the time that I was a kid. And so it's funny because for me it's like second nature to be thrown in and to not know what the topic of the song is going to be or
Right.
what the tempo is going to be and all these unknowns, but I can trust myself to like be able to just do it and just it's like a Rubik's
Exactly.
cube for me, right? Just to piece
Yeah.
it together. And there's other people on my team that would never be able to do it and they just are kind of like how do you do that like
Yeah,
it's
but
it's
it's got to come in handy, again, because we're talking about sort of, one of the things I think we're kind of edging around the theme of here is this notion of, performing in the moment and writing songs based on inspiration and kind of, and that's a part of it, right? Is that having the skill set to react in a way that not only serves the moment or the song or the lyric or whatever, but is also the right thing to do and something you are instantly capable of doing. It's like musicians who can sight read, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I think it really all comes down to being able to, like you said, kind of trust yourself in the moment and to know
Right.
how to navigate. I'm also a planner. Like I plan my life weeks and months in advance in terms of gigs or bookings
Clearly.
or studio time because there's like so
Yeah.
much on the go. So I'd like to be prepared, but at the same time there has to be that wiggle room for okay, I'm going to prepare as best as I can, but in the moment
Hmm.
I'm letting go and trusting what's going to unfold in that moment because not everything can be planned. And I think that's just
Yeah.
life. That's just life, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to call an audible and go with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you primarily write on guitar? Is that your, yeah? Do you play piano or anything else, or is it just guitar?
It's just guitar, but it's interesting because I get a lot of melody ideas in my head. It could be for vocals, but it could be just like coupled with something that's inspired by a certain guitar sound. I've started playing around with different tunings over the last few years, and someone else that
Mm,
did that was like Joni Mitchell, and you're playing like
sure.
not in standard tuning, and that can inspire all these new melody ideas. The other thing that's interesting too, though, is like when I'm in the recording process, I can hear certain instruments that I don't play. Like I don't play piano, but one of my best friends does, and we often collaborate on things. And I could also hear something like strings in a certain section, and I can kind of like figure it out on, GarageBand or something like that.
Right.
But I don't necessarily have to know how to play like a whole bunch of different instruments for
Right.
it to kind of come to life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How good a guitar player are you? Are you the kind of guitar player who, I mean, who sits around and practices scales for hours and hours and hours? Or is it for you primarily a tool of songwriting?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely a tool for songwriting. I think I've always approached it that way. I've never been like a John Mayer or somebody that just can
Right.
like do all these crazy solos. I think there's a time and a place for it for sure. Like that's when you get the session players that want to add to your music. But I think for me, like when I was about 15 or 16 years old, I wanted to pick up a guitar because I wanted to be able to put my lyrics and my melodies to song and to form songs. Like I wanted to write, and I just needed enough to like make that happen, if that makes sense. So yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely like have always used it as a tool and
And I find
as a
that a very
vessel.
interest. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting approach because again, like you say, there are a lot of guitar players who are obviously can do a million billion things. But it seems to me that there are so many songwriters who are, decent guitarists, but not on that level. And I find it interesting because I think you would think that the better you are as a guitar player, the better you're going to be as a songwriter. But I don't think the two correlate that way, I mean, I find it interesting that there are so many great songwriters who can be fairly rudimentary guitar players or just know enough to
Yeah,
do
to get
what they
by.
need to do with it?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think sometimes less is more, right?
right.
And I have this conversation a lot even in terms of production. I think things can just be so overdone these days to the point
Hmm.
where a lot of artists can't even pull it off live, whether that's vocally because they're so auto-tuned or sometimes it's just like it goes too hard on like the constant guitar solos or it's like
Right.
almost just like oversaturated and I think there's just something about the tried and true like stripped down bare bones a song
Hmm.
hopefully should still be good with just an acoustic guitar and not all
Right.
the flashy stuff. I mean, sometimes again there's a time and a place to add in like all these other cool instruments and I do value having like a full band production sometimes, but I do a lot of solo shows and I got to be able to hold my own and carry a room full of people with just a
Right.
guitar and my voice and stories, right?
And I guess that's maybe why you have the acoustic version of the one song on the new EP, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking so much about moving forward. Do I want to do a stripped down album, right? Or do
Mm,
I want to kind of capture what's happening at the live shows on a recording because there's something different about it, right? And I do love these full band productions, like I said, to hear your song come to life from like an iPhone demo to like a full production is really wild and it's really cool.
right.
Um, but again, like primarily I'm doing solo or duo shows that are just as good, and I think, hopefully,
I'm
um,
sure.
and just as impactful. And so, yeah, I'm starting to think about these things and in future projects, like if I want to do more of an acoustic style.
Well, I mean, I have to say, talking to you today and hearing that intrigues me because it is something that, when I listen to the EP or I listen to the singles you've put out, I hear, you doing these full band productions and doing things, doing, kind of a variety of rootsy styles over the course of the EP. One of the songs is a little more country, one of the songs a little more rock. It kind
Totally.
of feels, like you're kind of covering the waterfront there. But when you say, well, yeah, but then here's what I do live, and I'm telling stories, and it's just me and a guitar, and I'm reacting in the moment. I mean that that sense of immediacy is definitely not something that you're hearing on the EP, right? Because obviously you're in a studio, you're picking away at it, you're doing it piece by piece. It can't be there. So yeah, I would say that the concept of you putting out an EP of your live recordings, or even just going into a studio with a handful of people and
Yeah.
doing it straight to tape. There's a famous old, I'm sure you've never heard it. There's a famous old Tom Waits album he did way back in the 70s where he got a jazz trio and they set up in the studio and they invited in a small audience, I don't know, a few dozen people, set up a bar, serve drinks, and he just did the show, live to tape, and that was his live album. So
It's super cool. I think
yeah,
maybe we should bring that back, right? Like, uh,
definitely.
I think all the old bands used to do that kind of thing. And the industry's changed a lot in that way too, because things used to only be on tape. And so you kind of only had one shot
Hmm.
to get it right. And that was just the way that it is. And I think people have just become so obsessed with this overproduction thing, or it's not perfect enough, or how do we make it perfect in
Right,
their own home studios, or even if you bring it to a bigger one. We have this idea these days that because you have the luxury of recording it as many times as you want,
right.
that I think artists these days are kind of programmed to think that we should really use that to our advantage and kind of overdo it sometimes. Um, but maybe, yeah, like go back to the roots of, okay, well, let's just do it. Let's just do a
Yeah, no, I
take,
think so.
and I will say, I mean, maybe I should look into this as well. Within the last couple years, I started recording some like live off the floor music videos, and it's kind of the same idea. So, the audio actually on the EP is from one of those sessions where
Right.
I just played it live as a duo, and I thought, okay, let's put that at the end of the EP. So that's always great to have too, and maybe I should look into doing more of that. Just capturing those moments live with like audio and video.
Yeah, you could do it's kind of a both sides of the coin thing, right? Then for the people who want the sort of lusher, fuller production, full band stuff, and as you say, that's more geared for the radio or the airwaves or things like that. That's great. And then these other things kind of are, I think, more of an intimate revelation of what it is you're actually doing day to day, because obviously you're not, pulling out a full band for
Yeah.
every show, or if any shows, right? Do you ever get a chance to really do that live?
We did it for the EP release. We did a full band, but it's very rare.
Yeah,
And again, it comes down to like everything is such an investment. As an artist these days, I think it's probably always been that way, but it's even more challenging now with the whole streaming thing because you're not going to recoup. So if you're spending thousands of dollars on recordings and music videos and your publicist and your new
right.
photos and your all this stuff, and then you're playing live shows, you got to pay your players. And so
Yeah,
I think everyone's trying to figure out how to make it work. So like as a solo artist, it works really well for me to live in a
yeah,
place like Calgary where there's constant work for me to be gigging solo, and then I can actually make some of that money back that I'm investing in recordings.
right.
But if I did a full band show all the time, like I'd be in the hole constantly.
Oh yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, you're not alone in that. There are bands at far higher levels, artists at far higher levels of the music industry who can't afford to take out full bands. It's just crippling. Never mind the actual just paying people to do it, but the
Yeah.
hotel, the travel, the accommodations, of this, of that, it's ruinous. Whereas Gillian Welch and David Rawlings get in a van with their two guitars
Yeah.
and they're good to go.
Totally. And that's why I like having the option to do a duo. Like that's something that's still fairly new that I started within the last 2 years, with my friend Sarah Houston. So she's a local piano composer and she has her own
Mm,
career doing like sleep albums, meditation albums, just like composing all this piano stuff. And there's a huge market for that. And
sure.
uh and so she's not necessarily always like a live performing artist, but I bring her out for some of my shows, and that's nice too, just to kind of play off that energy, someone that I'm really close friends with and someone that we just have a really good energy together. So it's nice to have that as just a secondary option and more affordable too than like bringing out a full band on tour all the time.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have other than just like having a solo show all the time.
Indeed. So do you have, you said you're a planner.
Yeah.
What's the plan after this? What's the next sort of, thing you want to do?
I definitely want to spend some time writing over the course of the winter. I have some demos that I'm sitting on. So I finally was awarded a grant I've been trying to get for 2 years. It's so tough to get grants these days. And I will say that Alberta has a lot of opportunities for artists, which is great too. I think every province probably has some sort of like arts funding, but
Hmm.
um, it's
We have two in
competitive.
Manitoba.
That's great. Like
Yeah,
it's great, but it's also competitive. I think it's always been competitive. And what I've heard is that since the pandemic, they just have way less funding than they used to have.
sure.
So I've been submitting for the last couple years, trying to get like a provincial wide and a local grant as well to Calgary and without much success, unfortunately. And then I've talked to people on the board or the directors and tried to get feedback, and everyone's like, it's a super strong application. I have nothing to tell you but keep applying because
Yeah.
every jury is different and we have way less funding and the rates are so low to actually be awarded. I think
Hmm.
over the last couple years, it's about 8 or 9 million dollars requested just in Calgary alone to this
Right.
grant, and they might have two to give out. And so,
Yeah.
it's just a numbers game. So luckily, I have some funding for next year to get in the studio for two singles for the new new year. Um,
Oh, doubling your output.
yeah, I'm gonna do one in the spring and one in the fall,
Uh-huh.
and kind of follow up on this release in the spring as well. I'll probably release a new lyric video for one of the newer songs that wasn't previously released, and continue with the shows. This place is ridiculously busy for shows, which
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for. I mean, things always slow down in the winter for everybody, but
Sure.
we're looking forward to doing some like duo shows a little bit out of town in the new year as well. So yeah, I mean, just continuing to fight the good fight, if you will.
Yeah. I would think winning you won, what was it, Solo Artist of the Year at the YYC Awards. That must have helped with
Yeah.
the whole grant thing.
It's funny. I think I don't even know if I won it like at the time.
Hmm.
I think I got the grant maybe just before I found out.
Oh, well, congratulations either way then. And I gotta say,
Yeah.
that's all the more impressive because as I've said, it's not like you've been inundating inundating people with 100 songs. So for you to win Solo Artist of the Year, I mean, I'm guessing it's kind of a performance based award and to some degree, given that's what I assume is most people's sort of experience with you.
Yeah, I would say probably like it's hard to say, like I don't even know what the jurors are looking for, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
whatever it is, you're doing it right. So
I guess so. Like I think maybe it's a little bit of everything, like
hmm.
um yeah, just being really active on the scene here, right? Like whether it's with
Right.
kids or um like lots of music students and lots of trying to just be active and doing songwriting with the next generation, and then a ton of live shows like just constantly, and new enough recordings to submit into, right? Like some of these songs on the EP were released as singles over the last couple of years, so
Right.
it's not like they're super ancient. I mean, the industry might deem them to be old, but realistically, they're still fairly new.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I don't know what it is like, but I'm busy, that's for sure.
Well, that's good. And so what's the dream? If the goal is to, get a couple of songs out next year, what would be the best case scenario for you, going forward?
I think I've always wanted to tour a little bit outside of Canada, to be honest with you, which is a really
Mhm.
tricky thing to navigate. There's a lot of singer-songwriters that I love and listen to from the States that are doing super well, and they're not necessarily getting radio play, but they can fill rooms in the
Yeah,
States.
that's the trick, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tricky for Canadian artists to try to figure out the legalities of going down to the States because there's a lot of paperwork and you need, the
Yeah.
visas, and it's
Yeah.
actually quite difficult to get anything going down there and to have it be worth it financially, because once you start earning US dollars, you're paying US taxes and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So I know a couple of people that have done it, and they've done like opening slots for tours in the States. The good news is that you're playing to a new audience that may be really interested in following you and your story and your
Mhm.
journey too. at the same time, if you're only making a couple $100 out of it, it's like, you're paying for your own hotel and you're paying for all the travel. It's a tough thing to navigate, but at the same time, like I would like to explore just some new places because I've played a lot throughout Canada, whether that's shows in Ontario or Montreal or Vancouver, and quite a bit now in Alberta. So, I would definitely love to just tour outside of Canada, but finding the way to do that is the challenge.
Yes, well, I mean, there is a good folk fest circuit, obviously, in the summertime all across the country. I'm sure they'd love you there.
Yeah, something like that would be really, really great for
Yes,
me, I
well,
think. Maybe I'll add that to the list.
oh, you have a list?
It's
I get
all
the
the
sense you're a
things.
list person.
Oh, totally. Because otherwise you'll never get anything done. And
Yeah,
there's just like so many deadlines for grants or for festivals or for awards or for whatever it is, right? Like any kind of funding that you're trying to get. It's just like it's
right.
constantly. Yeah, and you know what? I might want to do something like Breakout West. Like I've never gone to Breakout West,
Mm,
because I was always out east, and then for some reason, like it was just never on my radar. But it seems like there's a lot of cool things that happen with that as well. So I mean, just things that I haven't done before, I guess you could say, because I think I had a huge checklist of things to do when I got to Calgary, right? Find a new producer and find your people and
right.
network and how are you going to play live shows and make all those connections. So I had a lot to do, and I've kind of achieved like a lot of those small goals that I've had for the last 5 years. So now I think I'd like to do some new things.
Time to move on to the 10-year plan.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, in light of that, I will let you go because I know then you obviously have 100 things you need to get to.
Totally.
But listen, thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for the music.
Yeah,
And we'll see you somewhere down the road.
absolutely. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the conversation, and it seems like we're on the same level on a lot of things. So yeah, I appreciate
Oh,
that.
definitely. Well, it was my pleasure. All right. Take care. Enjoy your day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye.